Welcome back to the channel, and today we're doing something a little bit different, but only because a few people have requested it. I absolutely adore the game Subnautica. I think a lot of people know that considering my most recent playthrough of it on the channel in streams. And this week we got the first early access trailer for Subnautica 2. So I thought it would be interesting just to go through the trailer and also the new images we've got on the Steam store page for the game, just to have a look at them and see what I think of them and see if they're going to get me hyped or not. Now, Below Zero, which was Subnautica's DLC ripoff, spin-off that was released a few years ago, just failed to grasp me. It failed to sort of drag me in as much as the original game. So I'm really hoping that Subnautica 2 really improves upon some of the elements that were sort of lacking, I think, in Below Zero. But let's have a look at this trailer first of all. I think this trailer already starts by getting the atmosphere of the game completely correct, of just a single person lacking oxygen with that familiar, anyone who's played Subnautica, we know that the little warning beep that the suit makes when you're low on oxygen, that's like it's the game trains you to trigger to that noise. Like the minute you hear that sound of like beep beep oxygen, it's like, oh shit, gotta get to the surface. So I think already, and also that sort of just the falling through this sort of black inky void, it's immediately understanding what makes Subnautica a great environmental horror game, as opposed to Below Zero, which I don't really feel had the same sort of environmental horror as the original game. So it's nice to see them sort of remembering that. And then we cut to this wonderfully vibrant, beautiful, I'm going to say sort of a coral reef, because that's the closest thing that I can really think that it resembles. This brilliantly bright coral reef full of yellows and oranges, and that's something else about the original game which I absolutely adore. And also Below Zero, I think, did a relatively decent job of this, in that it created this wonderfully vibrant landscape. A lot of survival games, I think, go for the sort of edgy realism that, while immersive in its own way, I think can be a bit boring on the eyes. But this is absolutely beautiful, it's vibrant, it's in your face, and it does have that sort of Subnautica 1 tropical feel to it, as opposed to Below Zero, which, while it did also look vibrant in some places, you couldn't deny that a lot of Below Zero was just ice. And ice, just constant ice, can be a bit dull. Also, I love this bright purple fish that passes by the camera. It immediately makes me think of the Peeper straight away, with its singular eye and sort of similar shape. Something that I think is interesting is just before the camera cuts again, in the background we can see this sort of shadowy construction. And I am going to say construction because it very much looks artificial to me. There's some artificial shapes here. It looks like there's a sort of tower with windows, and this is interesting considering what the Steam store page says for the game, but we'll get to that in a minute. I just thought it was interesting to point out. We have a brief cut back to sort of our poor fellow being warned that his oxygen is critical before we watch him scanning something which very quickly comes alive, and we have this huge, I mean it's absolutely enormous compared to him. We have this enormous crab, for want of a better term. Reminds me of the crab squid from the first game, but this is very much more crabby. And that was something I always thought that the first game was actually lacking. There wasn't very many enemies with a sort of crustacean feel. There wasn't anything that was sort of a crab or lobster like. You had sort of the crab squid, but I would say that was more like a combination of a crab and a jellyfish than a pure crustacean. So seeing these sort of giant armored crabs kind of reminds me a bit of the Mirelurks in shape from Fallout 4, but I think it looks absolutely wonderful. And again, we have another view of just as the camera passes by this crab, you can see this view of these artificial structures again. The tower in the center, but slightly off to the right, you can see what looks like the sort of skeletal remains of another building, which seems to suggest that this planet is going to be one that has been abandoned or perhaps pre-built. The structures don't look similar to the precursor ones though from the first game, so I'm wondering if we're going to be, exploring a civilization that's different, and then our poor fellow gets sucked down this big tube into nothingness, where we have a camera cut and he wakes up in the gloom only for some lights to shine on him, and it's revealed there's a submarine with a companion. And this is obviously representative of this Subnautica being a cooperative multiplayer game for the first time. The design of the submarine, to me, where she's actually sat, looks very similar to me of the sea truck, which did have this quite sort of big curved frontal window, as opposed to the sea moth, which just had the sort of spherical window at the front, which is a bit of an iffy sign for me. I was no particular fan of the sea truck. I vastly preferred having the sea moth and the cyclops from the first game. The sea truck for me was kind of the worst aspects of the sea moth and the worst aspects of the cyclops combined into one. So I am hoping that the submarine that they choose for this game is going to be better than the sea truck for a fact. Camera pans and we watch these fish sort of swim by. They remind me a lot of the hoop fish from the first game. And then we have the reveal of this enormous purple light up Cthulhu-esque octopus-like Leviathan behind them. Again, we get another view of the submarine. Again, I'm not sure whether that is the sea truck. It looks very similar, but obviously I'm hoping it's going to be a submarine unique to this game. And yeah, and then that's the end of the trailer. Having an octopus-like Leviathan, I think, is again a really cool feature. Again, it was another type of life form sort of missing from the first game, and Below Zero was a sort of octopus or squid-like animal. Obviously, there were elements of squid and octopus-like attributes to a lot of animals in both games, but a proper just solid squid or octopus based Leviathan creature is going to be pretty creepy, I have to say. I just love the tone and atmosphere to this particular trailer. It really leans on that sort of environmental horror aspect of the first game, which I think is looking really, really good. Let's have a look at the images we got on Steam and also what the Steam store page says. So the first picture on the Steam store page is this shot of, obviously from the player's perspective through the mask, traveling through what looks very similar to the coral environment that we saw in the trailer. And you can see the first thing I would say is obviously we've got companion with us, which I assume is going to be another player, and we've got what looks like these cute little sort of jet propulsion devices on our wrists. I assume these are going to be sort of a replacement for the Sea Glide from the first game, which I always thought was a bit cumbersome. Having them sort of like little jet propulsion devices on your wrists looks just a little less cumbersome and more interesting. These animals off to the side as well, we get a better shot of those in a different screenshot, so I'll talk about those in a minute. Next screenshot is this wonderful shot of the sun through the sort of brown grass fields. And we have this, I'm not even sure how to describe it, this discus-like creature in the foreground with these beautiful red petals, kind of like a combination of a fish and a flower, which I think looks really interesting. You got some of those pink peepers around it. I just love how vibrant, and also you can tell that they've really given the game a big graphical improvement over the other games, and it really tells in some screenshots like this. The next shot is really cool, and I think this one shows us at least what the submarine is in the trailer, but I don't think it's going to be the only submarine. This looks like a replacement for the Sea Moth. The submarine in the foreground, it looks like it's going to be a small sort of one-person submarine like the Sea Moth, but instead of it being sort of spherical in nature, it's going to be a bit more sort of rectangular. And we've got the crabs again from the trailer, but these look different. They don't have the massive sort of bulbous shell on the top. So whether these are sort of a small version, like a juvenile version of these crabs, and then that one we see in the trailer is like a big sort of leviathan or an adult version, but they look creepy and huge enough as juveniles. And then we have these wonderful purple sort of hoop fish sort of things as well. Shot number 4 is, I think, probably the most spectacular out of all of the screenshots on the Steam page. This is basically like a lava zone shot from the first game, but you have these predatory fish. They look brilliant with the sort of black and blue and red patterning on them. They're really bright and distinct. But these are obviously going to be very aggressive animals, given that one's coming at the player ready to bite him. They kind of remind me a bit of Dunkleosteus in a way. These big, very simple jaws with just very prominent jagged teeth at the front. Does remind me of the Dunkleosteus, but yeah, I love the sort of crimson lighting they're going for here, and it just looks great. And the last screenshot they have on the Steam website, we see again the sort of coral zone from the trailer, and you have this purple kelp. I'm going to call it purple kelp, but it looks like it's growing downwards from the roof of this cave system as opposed to upwards, which is interesting. And then you have the player. Now this is obviously, I think, some sort of scanning device. It looks like the scanner to me, but the green effects and animation that looks like it's playing does remind me of the sort of precursor green effects that you get in the other 2 games. So I'm wondering if Altera has started combining precursor technology with itself, possibly. And then you have the player scanning this blue and yellow fish, which reminds me really of Xiphactinus. Looks like it's going to go and try and eat one of these poor pink peepers. But again, in general, I would say these screenshots, what they show is a really vibrant game like the first. That's really going to sort of lean into its environmental detail a lot, which is nice. And I just love how distinctive these areas look, from the sort of vibrant coral-esque environment to the sort of barren areas where the crabs are to the sort of crimson lava zone. I just love how different each of these environments look, which again was another problem with sort of Below Zero. That too many of the environments felt a bit samey, mostly because of the ice. Now the store page gives us some more details about the game. So we know that we're going to be a pioneer traveling to a distant world, but something is going to be wrong, and the ship's AI is going to be driving us to complete the mission, even though we think the planet's a bit too dangerous for humans. I like the idea of an artificial intelligence being the bad guy. I think it's a bit of a sci-fi cliche, but I also quite like the idea that we're being pressured by an outside influence here. The store page makes a big deal of the co-op features. We're going to be playing alone, or we can play with up to 3 other people in a multiplayer co-op. Having up to 4 people helping you build a base and exploring the world, that's really going to change up how the game feels. One of the, I suppose, advantages and disadvantages with the first game was that you were on your own all of the time, which did add to the environmental horror aspect of sort of being crushingly alone. But at the same time, you would build this enormous base. The base building was very cool and very easy to get into, but you would build this base and you'd have no one to share it with. You'd build a Cyclops, this huge submarine, and you'd have no one to pilot it with. So bringing in a co-op focus, they're going to lose sort of the advantage of the environmental horror of being alone, but at the same time being able to play with friends, being able to play with Dane or with Fallout or anyone else is going to be really cool. I am glad that we can play it alone though as well. So we're told that we're going to be using basic items like the scanner and flashlight, but we'll find the recipes for more advanced equipment, tools and submersibles. And the bases are going to be even more customizable with an overhauled building system, which I can't wait to get my hands on. Subnautica's building system, I think, was really unique and really interesting, and I love building enormous bases and imagining how they're going to work and how people would live in them. Expanding on that and getting a whole new system sounds really interesting. Something that is really sort of prevalent throughout the whole Steam page is this idea of adapting to the world and adaptation. They mention it in a lot of these paragraphs, which I'll get to in a second. They say we're going to have new diverse biomes, from towering underwater cliffs to lush coral fields. This aquatic alien world is going to be brimming with vibrant and breathtaking biomes, each teeming with diverse ecosystems and unique creatures. But something isn't right. The world is out of balance. What happened here? What happened to you? And more importantly, where are you? So again, they're going to be heavily leaning on this idea that wherever we are, we haven't been before. That was, I think, one of the problems with Below Zero, is that we were going back to the same planet and we were dealing with the same sorts of life in some respects. So we weren't, to use a Star Trek cliche, we weren't going boldly where no one's been before, we were going back somewhere where someone's already been. So knowing that we're going to be going to a completely different planet where no one has been, we're completely confused about why we're there, and that there's some sort of greater intrigue as well, that sounds really cool. So the next bit on the Steam page returns to a cancelled feature from the first game. It mentions that we're going to be utilizing the scanner, yes, to scan all of the life from the smallest fish to the biggest leviathans, but we're also going to be using the biosampler to take samples to study and evolve our own genetics to adapt our body for survival. So it looks like there's going to be a sort of genetic modification system in the game where we're going to use alien DNA to improve our own bodies, which I believe was a feature that they were going to have in the first game. There is some cut content for sort of biosampling and such, but obviously they're introducing it now in their second game, and I think that sounds really, really fun. Depending on how in-depth the system is, I love the idea of not only building sort of submarines and technology to adapt to the aquatic environment, but also being able to like physically adapt our own bodies, because that's one of the prevailing, or that's one of the new sort of lines of thinking going into how we're going to explore outer space and live on other planets, is this idea that we're not going to modify the planet through terraforming it, for example, because that's a very difficult process. It would probably be easier just to modify our own bodies for the environments that we have to live on. So I think that's a really interesting possible gameplay change. We're told that the world is going to be vast and deep, and that we're going to have to push beyond our boundaries and unlock the secrets of this strange world. Again, that was something about Below Zero that I think didn't work in its favor, is that the environment was very small and it was a bit shallow. Literally, it never went as deep as the original game. Below Zero was going to be DLC for the first game, which is probably why it was so small. Which is again why I kind of consider Below Zero a bit of a rip-off, because it was a DLC being sold as a full game for the same price as the first game. I really hope they've learned their lesson and this new world is going to be as vast and deep as the Steam page claims it is. Especially if you're going to have like 4 people helping you, you need the environment to be vast, because 4 people would explore sort of the 2x2 kilometer square map of Subnautica 1, for example. 4 players with 4 CMOS would explore every area of that pretty quickly. And then the rest of the Steam page then talks about the team, who we already know from Subnautica 1 and Below Zero. Overall, I think the trailer looks really good. I think all the screenshots look really good, and all the information we've received so far also does make me feel a bit more positive about this game than I did Below Zero. I just really hope that they learned from some of the mistakes they made with Below Zero. For example, I'm pretty sure that because of the co-op nature of the game, hopefully the protagonists are going to be silent, which is good, because I couldn't stand Below Zero's protagonist. She would not shut up. Every time it got a bit tense, she had to have this terrible quip. And it was like playing a game with Chris Pratt and always having to fucking quip. It ruined the atmosphere every time. So I really hope that they've learned from Below Zero. But yeah, overall, I wouldn't say I'm hyped. I'm curious and I'm looking forward to seeing more. Let me know down in the comments if you're interested in Subnautica 2 and whether you'll be getting it on early access or not, and what you thought of the trailer and screenshots. And don't forget, while you're down there, to give the video a like and subscribe for more future possible Subnautica content from me at Triclaw Gaming, at least, but for more gaming content from the rest of us at Triclaw. Until next time, stay safe and goodbye.